Oliver Twist, Part 5. On the following day, officers who had heard of the burglary and that a thief was prisoner in the Maylie house came from London to arrest him, but Dr. Losberne and Mrs. Maylie shielded him, and their joint bail was accepted for the boy's appearance in court, if it should ever be required. With the Maylies, Oliver remained, and thanks to their tender care, gradually throve and prospered, although it was long weeks before he was quite himself again. Many times he spoke to the two sweet ladies of his gratitude to them, saying that he only desired to serve them always. To this they responded that he should go with them to the country, and there could serve them in 100 ways. Only one cloud was on Oliver's sky. He longed to go to Mr. Brownlow and tell him the true story of his seeming ingratitude. So, as soon as he was sufficiently recovered, Dr. Losberne drove him out to the place where he said Mr. Brownlow resided. They hastened to the house, but, alas, it was empty. There was a bill in the window, "To Let," and upon inquiring they found that Mr. Brownlow, Mr. Grimwig, and Mrs. Bedwin had gone to the West Indies. The disappointment was a cruel one, for all through his sickness Oliver had anticipated the delight of seeing his first benefactor and clearing himself of guilt, but now that was impossible. In a fortnight the Maylies went to the country, and Oliver, whose life had been spent in squalid crowds, seemed to enter on a new existence there. The sky and the balmy air, the woods and glistening water, the rose and honeysuckle were each a daily joy to him. Every morning he went to a white-haired old gentleman who taught him to read better and to write. Then he would walk and talk with Rose and Mrs. Maylie, and so 3 happy months glided away. In the summer, Rose was taken down with a terrible fever, and anxiety hung like a cloud over the cottage where she was so dear. But at length the danger passed, and the loving hearts grew lighter again. Meanwhile, a man named Monks, a friend of Fagin's, had by chance seen Oliver, had been strangely excited and angered at the sight of him, and after carefully learning some details of the boy's history, had gone to the beadle at the workhouse where Oliver began life, and by dint of bribes had extorted information concerning Oliver's mother, which only one person knew. Satisfied with what he learned, Monks conferred with Fagin, telling some facts about Oliver which caused Nancy, who happened to overhear them, to become terror-stricken. As soon as she could, she stole away from her companions out towards the West End of London, to a hotel where the Maylies were then boarding, and which she had heard Monks mention. Nancy was such a ragged object that she found it difficult to have her name carried up to Rose Maylie, but at length she succeeded and was ushered into the sweet young lady's presence, where she quickly related what she had come to tell. That Monks had accidentally seen Oliver, and found out where he was living and with whom. That a bargain had been struck with Fagin, that he should have a certain sum of money if Oliver were brought back, and a still larger amount if the boy could be made a thief. Nancy then went on to tell that Monks spoke of Oliver as his young brother, and boasted that the proofs of the boy's identity lay at the bottom of the river, that he, Monks, had money which by right should have been shared with Oliver, and that his one desire was to take the boy's life. These disclosures made Rose Maylie turn pale and ask many questions, from which she discovered that Nancy's confession was actuated by a real liking for Oliver and a fierce hatred for the man Monks. Her tale finished, and refusing money or help of any kind, Nancy went as swiftly as she had come, and when she left, Rose sank into a chair, completely overcome by what she had heard. Of course, the matter was too serious to pass over, and the next day, as Rose was trying to decide upon a course of action, Oliver settled it for her by rushing in with breathless haste and exclaiming,
"I have seen the gentleman who was so good to me, Mr. Brownlow." "Where?"
asked Rose.
"Going into a house," replied Oliver. "And Giles asked for me whether he lived there, and they said he did. Look here,"
producing a scrap of paper.
"Here it is. Here's where he lives. I'm going there directly. Oh, dear me, what shall I do when I come to hear him speak again?"
With her attention not a little distracted by these exclamations of joy, an idea came to Rose, and she determined upon turning this discovery to account.
"Quick," she said, "tell them to fetch a hackney coach, and be ready to go with me. I will take you to see Mr. Brownlow directly."
Oliver needed no urging, and they were soon on their way to Craven Street. When they arrived, Rose left Oliver in the coach, and sending up her card, requested to see Mr. Brownlow on business. She was shown upstairs and presented to Mr. Brownlow, an elderly gentleman of benevolent appearance, in a bottle-green coat, and with him was his friend, Mr. Grimwig. Rose began at once upon her errand, to the great amazement of the two old gentlemen. She related in a few natural words all that had befallen Oliver since he left Mr. Brownlow's house, concluding with the assurance that his only sorrow for many months had been the not being able to meet with his former benefactor and friend.
"Thank God,"
said Mr. Brownlow.
"This is great happiness to me, great happiness. But why not have you brought him?"
"He is waiting in a coach at the door,"
replied Rose.
"At this door?"
cried Mr. Brownlow, with which he hurried down the stairs without another word, and came back with Oliver. Then Mrs. Bedwin was sent for. "God be good to me," she cried, embracing him. "It is my innocent boy. He would come back, I knew he would. How well he looks, and how like a gentleman's son he's dressed again. Where you been this long while?" Running on this, now holding Oliver from her, now clasping him to her, and passing her fingers through his hair, the good soul laughed and wept upon his neck by turns. Leaving Oliver with her, Mr. Brownlow led Rose into another room, by her request, and she narrated her interview with Nancy, which occasioned Mr. Brownlow no small amount of perplexity and surprise. After a long consultation, they decided to take Mrs. Maylie and Dr. Losberne into their confidence, also Mr. Grimwig, thus forming a committee for the purpose of guarding the young lad from further entanglement in the plots of villains. Through Nancy, with whom Rose had another interview, the man Monks was tracked and finally captured by Mr. Brownlow, who, to his sorrow, found that the villain was the erring son of his oldest friend, and his name of Monks only an assumed one. Facing him in a room of his own house to which Monks had been brought, Mr. Brownlow charged the man with one crime after another. The father of Monks had two children, who were half-brothers, Monks and Oliver Twist. The father died suddenly, leaving in Mr. Brownlow's home the portrait of Oliver's mother, which was hanging in the housekeeper's room. The striking likeness between this portrait and Oliver had led Mr. Brownlow to recognize the boy as the child of his dear old friend. Then, just when he had determined to adopt Oliver, the boy had disappeared, and all efforts to find him had proved unavailing. Mr. Brownlow knew that, although the mother and father were dead, the elder brother was alive, and at once commenced a search for him. Now he had discovered him in the man Monks, the friend of thieves and murderers, and by a chance clue he found also that there had been a will dividing the property between the two brothers. That will had been destroyed, together with all proofs of Oliver's parentage, so that Monks might have the entire property. Fearing discovery, Monks had bargained with Fagin to keep the child a thief or to kill him outright. This revelation of his crime in all its terrible details, told in clear cutting tones by Mr. Brownlow, while his eyes never left the man's face, overwhelmed the coward Monks. He stood convicted and confessed his guilt. Then, because the man was son of his old friend, Mr. Brownlow was merciful.
Will you set your hand to a statement of truth and facts, and repeat it before witnesses?
He asked.
That I promise,
said Monks.
Remain quietly here until such a document is drawn up, and proceed with me to such a place as I may deem advisable to attest it.
To this also Monks agreed.
You must do more than that,
said Mr. Brownlow.
Make restitution to Oliver. You have not forgotten the provisions of the will. Carry them into execution so far as your brother is concerned, and then go where you please. In this world you need meet no more.
To this also, at length, Monks gave fearing assent. A few days later, Oliver found himself in a travelling carriage rolling fast towards his native town with the Maylies, Mrs. Bedouin, Dr. Losberne, and Mr. Grimwig, while Mr. Brownlow followed in a post-chaise with Monks. Oliver was much excited, for he had been told of the disclosures of Monks which, together with journeying over a road which he had last travelled on foot, a poor, houseless, wandering boy without a friend or a roof to shelter his head, caused his heart to beat violently and his breath to come in quick gasps.
"See there, there," he cried. "That's the stile I came over. There are the hedges I crept behind, for fear anyone should overtake me and force me back."
As they approached the town and drove through its narrow streets, it became matter of no small difficulty to restrain the boy within reasonable bounds. There was the undertaker's, just as it used to be, only less imposing in appearance than he had remembered. There was the workhouse, the dreary prison of his youthful days. There was the same lean porter standing at the gate. There was nearly everything, as if he had left it but yesterday, and all his recent life had been a happy dream. They drove at once to the hotel where Mr. Brownlow joined them with Monks, and there, in the presence of the whole party, the wretched man made his full confession of guilt, and surrendered one half of the property, about £3,000, to his half-brother, upon whom, even as he spoke, he cast looks of hatred so violent that Oliver trembled. From some details of his confession, it was also discovered that Rose Maylie, who was only an adopted niece of Mrs. Maylie, had been the sister of Oliver's mother, and was therefore the boy's aunt, the first blood relation, except Monks, that he had ever possessed.
"Not aunt,"
cried Oliver, throwing his arms about her neck.
"I'll never call her aunt. Sister, my own, dear sister, that something taught my heart to love so dearly from the first. Rose, dear darling Rose."
And in Rose's close embrace the boy found compensation for all his past sadness. The only link to his old life which remained was soon broken. Fagin had been captured too, sentenced to prison for life, awaiting the fulfillment of his doom. In his possession he had papers relating to Oliver's parentage, and the boy went with Mr. Brownlow to the prison to try to recover them. With Mr. Brownlow, Fagin was obstinately quiet. But to Oliver he whispered where they could be found, and then begged and prayed the boy to help him escape justice, and sent up cry after cry that rang in Oliver's ears for months afterwards. But youth and sorrow are seldom companies for long, and our last glimpse of Oliver is of a boy as thoroughly happy as one often is. He is now the adopted son of the good Mr. Brownlow, removing with him and Mrs. Bedouin to within a mile of the Maylies' home. Mr. Brownlow gratified the only remaining wish of Oliver's warm and earnest heart, and as the happy days go swiftly by, the past becomes the shadow of a dream. The end.